For those of you who are just tuning in right now and missed part 1, you're late. Where have you been? So you're not completely lost. Here's a recap of what's been going on. I'm Victor, this is the Gen Experience, and this is part 2 of all those late, great things we Gen Xers thought couldn't get any better than they were right then. Got it? Good. If you don't, that's your problem, and you better think about that next time. You know, you could say we were short-sighted, but tech advances just didn't happen as quickly back then, and it took longer for new technology to be widely adopted. We also weren't known to sacrifice paying bills so we could have the newest thing. When newfangled push-button phones came along, most families just kept old reliable rotary on the kitchen wall. They may have been introduced in 1963, but it wasn't until the late 70s when the push-button phone hit the mainstream. Still, people seeing nothing more than the button gimmick didn't race to get one, as FOMO wasn't as prevalent in the Gen Experience. But into the 80s, there were few who could deny the quick calling offered by the buttons and the phone's zippy touch tones. You could even actually play a song on them buttons. Phones came in various styles and shapes. Yes, shapes, and if you want to learn more about those crazy 80s phones, check it out right here on the channel. There'll be a link in the description. With so many designs and sizes of buttons, the push-button home phone was the epitome of communication, not even being surpassed by the short-lived car phone. The home phone rang supreme. It wouldn't be replaced for more than 20 years, so why would we believe there was anything better to take its place? Little did we know. Now, cementing the phone as future technology was the cherry on top, the answering machine. The first one was released in early Gen X, but it was widely used by 1984. We adopted them over time and watched as full-size tapes were reduced to mini cassettes and then finally into solid-state memory storage. They just kept getting better with things like the high school locker version to leave a message for your locker partner, or how about all those crazy messages you could leave for incoming calls? Your roommates and you would make countless takes trying to get it just right. And if you couldn't, well, there were all those crazy message tapes to do it for you. Oh, these things weren't going anywhere soon. They were much too important. It wouldn't be until the late 90s before more people chose voicemail over these clunky and corded eyesores. Filled with messages from old flames, you'd save to listen over and over and over again, no matter how god-awful the sound quality was.
483-41.
Speaking of eyesores, the phone book couldn't have vanished quick enough. These unattractive stacks of bound thin paper became decor in every household and were something we all agreed had to go and wish evolved sooner. Lucky for all of us, they have completely gone the way of the dinosaur, and instead of letting our fingers do the walking, we used our finger to give it the bird on its way out. I don't want to say it was stagnated, but 13 channels got a little old. Remotes had even been standardized with their analog and clunky designs, shooting radiation into us every time you clicked what seemed like another garage door opener remote. But it wasn't TV per se, but what we could watch that was the big change and blew us away. Cable and the cable box, with its myriad of channels, became the status symbol we couldn't see getting any better. There is a long storied past with cable TV, but it's boring. All you need to know is that although it came around in the 50s, it wasn't until certain pressure on the FCC allowed their grip to loosen, and by the mid-70s things changed for the common family. Sure, we got excited about HBO, Showtime, and even Skinamax. I mean Cinemax. But what about all the rest? Let's not forget TBS or the Christian Broadcast Company. But let's get serious. We were there for the Disney Channel and all the other premium pay channels, like the 1981 debut of the 24-hour music channel MTV. Ever growing, these were television options we could barely wrap our heads around. Some cable boxes required manually changing the channel, but just the teasing of the vast array of niche options was enough to get our ass off the couch and see what was on by zipping through the channel dial extension. Even Playboy had a channel. The choices might have been endless, but so was the ease at which kids could watch not-so-kid-friendly programs. Although electronic cable boxes and their corresponding remotes would come along and play nice with our big console TVs and heavy tube television sets, the addition of cable was not just welcomed, but seen as impossible to top. And it wouldn't be for decades. Streaming what? The changes would come eventually, and slowly at first. But after this massive shift from the basic network TV to cable, how on earth could it get better? There was no place like the arcade, and you can fight me. These dimly lit establishments with rows of dark cabinets featuring incredible artwork was like Alice going through the looking glass to Wonderland, albeit a sketchy and smoke-filled Wonderland. Speaking of arcade cabinet artwork, check out another great show we have here on the channel. There's another link in the description. A quarter for a ride into a whole new world was a priceless chance to escape. Can you just imagine what it felt like the first time those environments, those characters and adventures popped in our living rooms? No, you can't, unless you were there. It seems impossible for the arcade cabinet to shrink to a home console, but it did just that. And although Pong was fun for a while, it wasn't until Atari's 2600 did everyone go bonkers. Now you could chomp pellets or climb to save the girl by simply pushing in a cartridge and pressing player 1 in the comfort of your home. We didn't stop dropping coin at the arcade right away. There just wasn't the endless game options for home systems like there was back at Joyland or the 8-Bit Emporium. Atari had replaced simpler systems like Odyssey by Magnavox, but after the E.T. video game humiliation of 1983, Nintendo creeped in like a ninja and just took over the top spot in '85, and kept growing. For a time, home video games seemed to be on the brink of failure, but Nintendo brought the great arcade titles that played like their video game cabinet counterparts, while introducing us to characters we didn't see at the arcade. As we fired our weapon in Duck Hunt, we looked at our home console and the array of video games littered on the floor as the peak of tech advancements for home entertainment. How were we to know? It would be 15 years before any real threat rose up against Nintendo. With that kind of longevity, how could we imagine today's video game offerings? A fridge is a fridge, right? Well, not if that fridge can make and dispense ice, not to mention chilled water. What? We had a fridge and a separate freezer, but of course, when you have 13 people in the family, it was a necessity. However, most people had an icebox or side-by-side refrigerator-freezer combo. That was the way it was since 1950. But then came ice out of the door, auto-magically. No more trays, no more buckets. Oh no, the door. Falling from who knows where, this mind blower from 1965 was a more compact version of what was found in hotel ice dispensers. Of course, since there was already the kind that dropped ice into a bucket in your freezer, or if you were the if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of guy, and didn't mind refilling ice trays, then you know not everybody jumped on the door dispenser all at once. But when chilled water joined the ice dispenser, how could you deny the future? We were moving on up. How could anything top this innovation? It would be years before things like the Door and Door and the smart fridges appeared on the scene. But let's be honest, those are about as practical as the Euro Club. That's sure to affect your game. Does anyone really use this shit? These new gimmicks were for gimmick's sake. The novelty wears off, but your payments don't. You know what else doesn't wear off? Ice and chilled water. Now there's a mainstay and just can't be topped. And what about this marvel? The microwave. Having one of these air-conditioned sized originals made you feel like a Rockefeller. It came with directions to help you cook a complete Thanksgiving feast. Very lovely thought, but not at all practical. We just used it to make popcorn and heat up hot dogs. Still, it made prep easy, and we couldn't believe our eyes at the very sight of those dials and large analog buttons for our convenience. How could that oversized alarm clock cook so quickly? With radiation, of course. Radiation we were all skeptical about for years. Sure, the seals kept any leakage negligible, but you still shouldn't watch the contents with your eyes glued to the window, just to avoid any possible cell mutation. The microwave has changed slightly over time, especially with a smaller profile and lower price. But it's the look and design from analog buttons and dials into touchscreens and digital technology that made the biggest advances. Other than that, you can argue it has evolved little, and those changes happened over time. Even today, aesthetic changes seem to be the only kind for this appliance. But unlike the VCR, we still like to use our microwave. Cars have always been a big deal. There's sedans and family cars, minivans, luxury models, and those 80s sports cars that every teen saved his paycheck to own. Exterior designs were as slow to evolve as they are today. There's still no flying cars or bullet designs like we were promised, but they are pretty much a necessity, so changes are subtle over time. They had been working just fine the way they were for years. What else did we really need from them anyway? Keyless entry? Automatic locks? Electric windows? We'll get Jane and George on the picture phone because you might as well be driving the Jetsons' car with these advancements. The days of pulling two keys out of your pocket, one for the door and one for the ignition, were coming to an end. By the late 70s, there was one key to rule them all. But in the early 80s, we suddenly had keyless entry. However, it didn't really catch on until the end of that decade. And inside, on the armrests, electric locks and controls to open our windows. This had been a luxury as far back as the 40s, but more prevalent in the 60s. We all wanted so badly to have electric windows, but unfortunately, many of us continued to crank those babies up until it became standard design in the late 80s, or when you had driven your car into the ground and needed a replacement. You can just tell how much of a priority these extras were to us back then. Am I right? Changing slowly over time was the norm while technology was catching up. Bet you didn't even notice when those front triangle vent windows vanished into obscurity with little fanfare. But one day, technology didn't only catch up, it would be way out in front, waiting for us. Until then, these little successes with locks and windows and air conditioning seemed like the ultimate coup de grace. What? You think we could have even fathomed backup cameras back then? Yeah, right. And I can't even begin to think how far we have come with the arrival of the home computer. This was reserved for sci-fi movies, but more and more people were getting a home computer in the 80s. Small, tiny, little computing power, even some people built their own. Little more than a glorified word processor, only the most advanced of us could program it to do your finances. But as a kid, I just hoped it played games. And it did. Although rudimentary, who doesn't have fond memories of dying from dysentery? We did not have a home desktop computer like the Apple II. But at school, we had time on the computer, and for years it seemed all we did was program it to make sound.
Hello, I am Macintosh.
Sure, they would change, but it would be baby steps for the next few years. None of us could imagine an entire computer sitting in the palm of your hands that did everything. There you have it. Not a complete or comprehensive list, but a good list of those amazing day-to-day objects that when they were introduced, Gen X thought it was it. How could it get better? I hope you saw part 1, but luckily it is an imperative you see them in order, so go see it now. It won't take long, and you'll enjoy it, I promise. Speaking of enjoying, please don't go without clicking the like, and it does a lot of good when you press subscribe. And if you comment, I won't be mad. Now look around the channel for more great content from the generation that gave us everything worthwhile, like this. Thanks for stopping by the Gen Experience and for giving me a watch. Don't forget to share with your friends, and until next time.